The ballroom lights shimmered like golden rain falling from the ceiling. Music drifted through the air, soft, slow, elegant. People laughed, crystal glasses clinked, and expensive perfume filled the room. It was one of those nights when everything looked perfect from the outside. But behind that shine, not everyone belonged. At the back of the grand hall, a young woman moved quickly between the round tables carrying a silver tray. Her black uniform was neat but a little too big, the sleeves folded twice to fit her arms. Her name was Emily Carter, and this was her third shift of the week at the Royal Crest Hotel. Her feet ached, and her stomach grumbled quietly, but she didn't stop. She couldn't afford to. Every tip mattered. Every polite smile might mean one more meal for her mother at home. The charity gala that evening was one of the biggest events of the year. Famous business owners, politicians, and celebrities had come to show off their wealth and give back to the community. The chandeliers above them sparkled like frozen fireworks, and in one corner a grand piano gleamed under a soft white spotlight. A young man in a tuxedo played gentle notes that floated like mist around the tables. Emily had never been to an event like this before. She had seen it only on TV, people dressed in silk and diamonds pretending to care about causes they barely understood. But still, she felt a tiny bit of wonder. She had always loved music, especially the piano. Once, before her mother got sick, she had spent hours every day practicing on an old upright piano that stood in their small apartment. The keys were chipped and yellow, but the sound had filled their home with hope. Now that piano sat silent, covered with dust. Her shift had started at 5 in the evening. By the time the clock on the wall reached 9, her arms were tired, her back hurt, and the fancy shoes the hotel made her wear had rubbed her heels raw. She glanced around the room, making sure everyone had drinks. At the main table sat the guest of honor, Richard Halden. Everyone knew that name. He was one of the richest men in the city, maybe even the country. He owned luxury hotels, tech companies, and half the real estate downtown. Tonight's event was hosted in his honor for donating millions to the charity. But despite the applause and polite smiles, people whispered that he was not an easy man to deal with. They said he was proud, short-tempered, and used to getting whatever he wanted. From where Emily stood, she could see him clearly. He was tall, dressed in a black suit with a silver tie, his expression sharp as glass. People around him laughed at his jokes a little too loudly. He nodded but rarely smiled. Every gesture of his showed power. The way he lifted his glass, the way he waved at the waiters, the way he looked around as if the world existed only to serve him. Emily kept her head down and focused on her work. She didn't want to draw any attention. Waitresses were told during training, be invisible, be polite, be fast. That's what she tried to do. As the piano music played, she caught herself humming softly. The melody was beautiful, slow, emotional, almost sad. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Her eyes followed the pianist's hands gliding across the keys, and she felt something stir inside her chest. It reminded her of home, of her mother lying on the couch listening while she practiced. Hey, table 7 needs champagne, a senior waiter hissed. Emily blinked, coming back to reality. Got it, she said quickly, picking up a tray and walking to the bar. The champagne bottles were heavy and cold. She balanced them carefully, checked her reflection in the mirror behind the counter, and started toward the guests again. Her steps were small and measured. The last thing she needed was an accident in a place like this. As she passed between 2 tables, someone suddenly stepped back without looking. A man laughing with his friends, holding a cigar. Emily tried to avoid him, but her shoe caught the corner of the carpet. In an instant, the tray tilted and one of the glasses slid off, falling to the floor. The sharp sound of breaking glass echoed through the room. Every head turned. Emily froze. Her face went pale and her heart raced. I'm so sorry, she whispered, kneeling down quickly to gather the pieces. Careful, the bartender hissed from across the room. But before she could finish cleaning, her elbow brushed against the side of the grand piano behind her. A few loud, awkward notes rang out, sharp, out of rhythm, cutting through the soft background music like thunder. The pianist stopped playing. The conversations died down. The room fell silent, and then came a deep, angry voice. What on earth are you doing? Emily looked up. It was Richard Halden. He stood from his chair, glaring at her. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried through the hall with a weight that made everyone shrink a little. Sir, I didn't mean to, she stammered. Do you have any idea how much that piano costs? he interrupted. His face was red now, his words sharp like knives. This isn't some cheap bar instrument. It's a Steinway grand worth more than your annual salary. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Some avoided eye contact. Others watched with cruel curiosity. The pianist looked down at the keys, pretending to be invisible. Emily felt tears building in her eyes, but she forced them back. "I'm very sorry, sir," she said softly. "It was an accident." "Accident?" Richard repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You think being careless is excused because you call it an accident? People like you never learn responsibility." The words hit her like cold rain. People like you. She had heard that before, in other jobs from other people who thought they were better. She lowered her head, cheeks burning with shame. "Clean it up and get out of the way," he said, sitting down again, still glaring. "You've ruined the atmosphere." For a long moment, the room stayed frozen. Then someone at another table coughed, and the sound broke the silence. The pianist slowly began to play again, but the melody felt empty now. Conversations resumed, quieter than before. Emily stayed on her knees, carefully picking up every tiny piece of glass. Her hands trembled, and one small shard pricked her finger. She didn't even flinch. When she finally stood up, she took a deep breath and walked toward the back of the room. Her manager caught her near the kitchen doors. "What happened?" he whispered harshly. "I dropped a glass, sir. I'm sorry," he sighed. "Try to stay out of sight for a bit. We don't need more attention." Emily nodded and stepped into the staff area. She leaned against the wall, feeling the weight of humiliation pressing down on her. The noise from the ballroom drifted in. Laughter, music, clinking glasses, but it all felt far away. In her pocket, her phone buzzed. She pulled it out and saw a text from her mother. "How's work, sweetheart? Don't stay too late. I made soup. Love you." Emily stared at the message, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. She typed back, "I'm okay, Mom, I'll be home soon." Then she wiped her eyes, straightened her uniform, and took a deep breath. She didn't know it yet, but that small accident, that single moment of embarrassment, was about to change everything. Back in the ballroom, Richard Halden sat quietly, trying to focus on the speech being given on stage. But something about that young waitress's face lingered in his mind. The look of shock, the fear, the pain of being humiliated in front of hundreds of people. He pushed the thought away. People like her, he told himself, made mistakes all the time. It wasn't his fault she was clumsy. Yet deep inside, something about the scene didn't sit right. The sound of those few piano notes, random, uneven, but oddly emotional, kept replaying in his head. For a split second before his anger, he had felt something he couldn't name. Emily, meanwhile, returned to the floor a half hour later. She moved quietly, keeping her eyes down, making sure not to go near the main table again. The night went on, long and tiring, but every time she passed by the piano, she glanced at it, not with fear, but with something deeper. She still loved the instrument. She still loved music, no matter what had happened. As the final speeches ended and guests began to leave, Emily helped clear the tables. The floor was littered with napkins and empty glasses. Her feet felt like stone, but she smiled faintly when one of the older guests thanked her for her hard work. When the room was almost empty, she found herself standing near the piano again. The pianist had left for a break, and the hall was quiet. She ran her fingers gently along the edge of the instrument, careful not to press any keys. It was beautiful, polished, perfect. She imagined sitting there, playing the songs she used to love. For just a moment, she let herself dream again. Then she heard footsteps. Someone was approaching. She turned, and her heart skipped a beat. Richard Halden was standing a few feet away, watching her. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. For a long second, they just looked at each other, the billionaire and the waitress, two lives that never should have crossed. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away. Emily exhaled slowly. She didn't know what he was thinking. She didn't even know what to think herself. All she knew was that tonight something had started, something she couldn't explain, and in a few hours the whole world would know her name. The next morning came slowly. The city was waking up, but Emily had hardly slept. The night before kept replaying in her mind, the broken glass, the piano, the voice of that rich man echoing in her ears. She kept hearing him say, "People like you never learn responsibility." Those words cut deeper than she expected. She had worked hard all her life, doing her best, and still somehow it had never been enough for people like him. Her alarm buzzed again, but she was already awake. She got out of bed quietly so she wouldn't wake her mother, who was sleeping in the next room. The apartment was small, just 2 rooms and a tiny kitchen. The wallpaper was peeling, the floor creaked, but it was home. Her mother's cough echoed softly through the thin wall, and Emily paused for a moment. Looking toward the door, she whispered, "It's okay. Mom, I'll bring your medicine after work." The hospital bills had drained almost everything they had. Her mother had been a teacher once, full of life and laughter. But illness had taken her strength, leaving Emily to carry the weight alone. Every extra shift, every tip went to medicine, rent, and sometimes just keeping the lights on. By the time Emily reached the hotel that morning, her stomach was already tight with worry. The gala cleanup was still going on. She hoped no one would mention last night. She had decided to just keep quiet and do her work, pretending nothing happened. When she walked into the staff area, a few co-workers gave her sympathetic looks. One of them whispered, "Don't worry about last night. Everyone saw it wasn't your fault." Emily gave a small smile. Thanks, but not everyone was kind. The senior waiter, who always tried to impress management, muttered, "Next time, try not to make a scene in front of the guests." She didn't answer. It wasn't worth it. She changed into her uniform and went to the main hall to help set up for a business brunch. The same piano from last night still sat there, polished again as if nothing had happened. For a moment, Emily stopped and stared at it. The memory of those random notes she had hit still made her cringe. She turned away and went back to folding napkins. Around noon, as she carried a tray of drinks to the far side of the hall, she noticed something that made her heart skip. Richard Halden was there again. He stood near the entrance talking to the hotel manager. His expression was calm, but his presence filled the room. He was the kind of person people noticed without wanting to. Emily tried to stay invisible, focusing on her work, but when she turned around, his eyes met hers. For a second, her breath caught. He looked at her, not with anger this time, but with something else, maybe curiosity. Then he looked away and continued his conversation. "Emily," the manager called, snapping her out of her thoughts. "Bring a bottle of sparkling water to Mr. Halden's table." Her hands went cold. Of all the people to serve, it had to be him. Still, she nodded. "Yes, sir." She walked to the back, picked up the bottle and a glass, and carried them carefully to his table. Every step felt heavy. When she reached him, she bowed her head slightly. "Good afternoon, sir. Your water." He didn't say anything at first. He watched her quietly as she poured the water. Then in a low voice, he said, "You work here full-time?" She blinked, surprised by the question. "Yes, sir." "Mostly evenings, sometimes mornings," he nodded slightly. "Long hours." "Yes, sir," she said softly. "But it helps," he didn't reply. He looked away again as if lost in thought. She placed the bottle on the table and stepped back, relieved to walk away. But before she turned completely, she heard him say, "You play the piano." Her hands froze. She turned back slowly. "I used to. A little." "I could tell," he said simply, his eyes still on the table. "The way you touched the keys last night. It wasn't random." She felt her face warm. "That was an accident, sir." "I didn't mean," he interrupted softly. "Accidents can still show truth." Emily didn't know what to say. For a moment, the tension from last night faded, replaced by confusion. Why was he being so calm now? Why was he even talking to her? "Go on," he said, gesturing lightly. "You have work to do." She nodded quickly and walked away, her heart pounding. She didn't understand him at all. Later that afternoon, when the brunch ended, the hotel quieted down. Most guests had left. Emily stayed behind to help clean up. As she wiped down the table, she noticed something strange. The lid of the piano was open, and on the stand there was a piece of sheet music. A small note was placed beside it. She looked around. No one else was there. Out of curiosity, she walked closer. The note said, "If you still remember how to play, prove it." It wasn't signed, but she didn't need a signature to know who it was from. Emily's hands trembled as she read it. She looked around once more. The hall was empty, sunlight pouring through the tall windows. For a long time, she stood there, torn between fear and longing. Her heart wanted to touch the piano again, but her mind screamed no. What if someone saw her? What if she lost her job? Then she remembered her mother's words from long ago. Don't let fear decide your life, sweetheart. Slowly, she sat down on the piano bench. Her fingers hovered over the keys. They felt cold, smooth, familiar. She pressed one gently. The sound echoed softly, warm and alive. It felt like coming home. She began to play, quietly at first, then stronger as the melody found her again. It was a song she had written years ago when her mother first got sick. It told a story of worry, hope, and love. Her fingers moved on their own, and the sound filled the empty room like sunlight breaking through clouds. She didn't notice the door open behind her. She didn't see the figure standing there, watching silently. When she finished, she let the last note fade into the air. Only then did she hear a slow clap. She turned quickly. Richard Halden was standing a few steps away. She stood up immediately, flustered. "I'm sorry, sir. I shouldn't," he raised a hand. "Don't apologize. That was unexpected." She stared at him, unsure how to take that. "I didn't mean to." "You play beautifully," he said, cutting her off. His tone was calm, serious. "Why are you working here?" Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Finally, she said, "I had to leave school. My mother's sick." "The bills?" She trailed off, feeling embarrassed. He nodded slowly. "I see." For a moment, silence filled the space. Then he said something that completely shocked her. "You shouldn't waste that talent. If you ever get a chance, play again. Don't let people like me silence you." Her eyes widened. "People like you?" she repeated. He smiled faintly, though it wasn't a happy smile. "Yes, people who forget where they came from." Before she could respond, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing there by the piano. She watched him go, still stunned. She didn't know what had just happened. The same man who had humiliated her last night had now complimented her, and even sounded regretful. She didn't understand why, but something told her this wasn't the last time they'd speak. That night, as she walked home, the air felt different. She carried no music sheet, no piano, but her fingers kept moving slightly in rhythm, as if still playing. For the first time in months, she felt a spark of hope. Maybe not everything was lost. Maybe some people could change. Maybe even rich men with cold eyes had hearts hidden under all that pride. When she reached her apartment, her mother was awake, sitting by the window. "You're late," she said with a gentle smile. "Tired?" "A little," Emily said, putting down her bag. "But something strange happened today." Her mother tilted her head. "Strange how?" "I played again." Her mother's eyes widened. "Really, after all this time?" Emily nodded slowly. "It felt right." Her mother smiled softly. "I always knew you would go back to it." Emily sat beside her and took her hand. The city lights flickered through the window. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel invisible. The sound of the piano still echoed in her heart, gentle and alive. Far away in a tall glass building overlooking the same city, Richard Halden stood by his window, looking down at the streets. He thought about the waitress, the way her hands moved over the piano, the honesty in her eyes. Something in him had shifted, though he didn't yet understand what. The sound of her melody still lingered in his mind like a memory he couldn't escape. That night, both of them, the billionaire and the waitress, fell asleep, thinking about the same tune. Neither knew that the song they shared would soon draw the attention of the entire world. The next few days at the hotel were quiet. Emily went about her work as usual, but something inside her felt different. It was as if the air around her had changed. Every time she passed by the piano, she remembered what he had said. "Don't let people like me silence you." She didn't fully understand why those words mattered so much, but they stayed with her. Her mother noticed the change, too. She smiled more often, hummed softly while cooking, and even talked about the future again. Emily didn't tell her everything about that day with Richard Halden, but she did say that someone had encouraged her to play again. Her mother simply said, "Then play, sweetheart. If life gives you one small window of light, don't close it yourself." A week later, Emily was called in early. The hotel was hosting another large event, this time for an art foundation. The hall was even more beautiful than before. Flowers lined the walls, candles flickered softly, and in the center of the room stood that same grand piano. She tried not to look at it too long, afraid of remembering that embarrassing night, but deep down she still felt drawn to it. Before the guests arrived, she was arranging glasses on a table near the back when she heard the manager's voice. "Everyone, listen up," he said. "Mr. Halden will be attending tonight again. Be careful and professional. No mistakes." Her stomach tightened. Of all people, he had to come again. She hadn't seen him since that day by the piano. She didn't know how to act if he spoke to her again. Should she thank him? Pretend nothing happened? As the guests began arriving, the soft chatter filled the hall. Emily moved through the crowd serving drinks and keeping her head low. The pianist played gentle background music, calm, elegant, and distant. Everything seemed perfect. Then, just as she placed a glass on a nearby table, a familiar voice spoke behind her. "You look less nervous today." She turned slowly. It was him. Richard Halden stood there in a dark gray suit, holding a glass of water instead of wine this time. His tone was calm, almost casual. She swallowed. "Good evening, sir." He nodded slightly. "So you came back." "I work here," she said quietly, unsure what else to say. He gave a small smile. "Of course you do, but that's not what I meant." Emily blinked, not understanding. Before she could ask, someone called his name from across the room. He gave her one last look and said, "We'll talk later." Then he walked away, leaving her confused once again. The evening went on. Speeches were given, applause followed, and waiters moved quickly to keep everyone happy. Emily stayed busy, trying to focus on her duties. But as the hours passed, she noticed Richard watching the piano from time to time, almost as if waiting for something. Later, when the dinner ended, the event's host walked to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "we have a special surprise tonight. One of our guests has kindly requested a small musical performance, something heartfelt to end the evening." The pianist looked surprised, but before he could move, Richard Halden stood up. "Actually," he said, his deep voice filling the hall, "I'd like to make a small change." People turned to him curiously. "Last week," he continued, "I heard something that reminded me what real music sounds like. Not from an orchestra, not from fame, but from someone who played with heart." He paused, glancing toward Emily. "I believe true talent shouldn't go unnoticed." Emily's chest tightened. She felt dozens of eyes turned toward her. Her heart pounded as she realized what was happening. The host smiled awkwardly. "Ah, you mean—" "Yes," Richard said simply. "The young woman who works here. Let her play." For a moment the room went still. The other waiters looked at each other in shock. Emily froze where she stood. Her hands went numb. She wanted to disappear. "Sir, I think—" she began, but her voice shook too much. Richard's tone softened. "Don't be afraid, just play what you feel." The manager whispered urgently, "Emily, you don't have to if you don't want to." But something inside her told her she should. Maybe it was the same voice her mother used to have, gentle but firm. Maybe this was the window of light she had been waiting for. Her legs felt weak as she walked toward the piano. The room seemed endless, filled with curious eyes and whispers. She sat down slowly, her hands trembling slightly as they touched the keys. The pianist had left the sheet music open, but she didn't look at it. She didn't need it. The music she wanted to play was already inside her. At first, her fingers hesitated, pressing one soft note after another. The crowd stayed silent. Then the melody began to grow. It wasn't perfect. A few notes slipped, her hands shook, but it was real. Every note carried her story, the long nights, the fear, the hope, the love for her mother, and the dream she had buried under years of struggle. People stopped talking. The waiters froze. Even the clinking of glasses stopped. The sound that filled the hall was pure emotion. Fragile, human, and true. Richard stood near the back, his eyes fixed on her. He didn't move, didn't speak. Something deep in his expression softened as he listened. When the last note faded, the silence was heavy. Then someone clapped. Another joined. And then the entire hall filled with applause. Not the polite kind given at galas, but real, honest applause from people who had felt something genuine. Emily looked down, tears in her eyes. She stood up slowly and gave a small bow. Her hands were shaking, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was relief, the feeling of finally being seen. Richard walked closer, smiling faintly. "You did?" "Well," he said softly, his voice barely above the sound of people still clapping. "Thank you," she whispered. He looked at her for a long moment. "I think I owe you an apology," he said finally. She blinked. "For what?" "For that night," he said quietly. "I was wrong." The words surprised her more than the applause had. Billionaires didn't usually say sorry, especially not to waitresses. But in his eyes she saw sincerity. He wasn't the same man who had shouted at her a week ago. "I shouldn't have spoken to you like that," he continued. "You didn't deserve it." Emily didn't know what to say. "It's okay," she said softly. "You didn't know me." He gave a small smile. "I still don't, but I'd like to." Before she could respond, the host returned to the microphone, thanking everyone and announcing the end of the event. The crowd began to move again, talking excitedly about the performance. Several guests even came to Emily, complimenting her and asking where she had learned to play. She answered humbly, keeping her voice steady, but inside her heart was soaring. After the guests left, the hall slowly emptied. The piano sat silent again, but something about it felt different, as if it belonged to her now, even just for a moment. She helped clean up quietly, smiling to herself. As she carried a stack of plates toward the kitchen, Richard stopped her again near the doorway. "I'm serious about what I said," he told her. "You shouldn't hide your gift." "I don't know where to start," she admitted. He reached into his pocket and handed her a small card. "Here," he said. "My office number. Call me tomorrow." She stared at it, stunned. "Why?" "I have an idea," he said simply. "Let's just say I believe in second chances. For both of us." Then he walked away, leaving her speechless. She looked down at the card in her hand. The name printed on it was enough to make anyone tremble, but instead of fear she felt something new. Possibility. That night, when she reached home, she placed the card on the table. Her mother noticed it immediately. "What's that?" she asked. "An opportunity," Emily said quietly. "I think." Her mother smiled knowingly. "Then don't waste it." Emily looked out the window at the city lights. Somewhere out there, a door had opened, one she never thought would even exist for someone like her. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't the same girl who had dropped a glass and been yelled at. She had found her voice again. Far away in his penthouse office, Richard sat by the piano in the corner of the room. It had belonged to his late wife, and for years he hadn't touched it. But now, as he thought about the young waitress who had reminded him what true passion looked like, he lifted the lid and pressed a single key. The sound was soft, gentle, and like forgiveness. He smiled faintly, realizing that sometimes it takes a stranger to remind you what being human really means. The next morning, Emily woke up early. She had hardly slept, her mind full of what had happened the night before. The applause, the sound of the piano, and the card with his name on it, it all felt like a dream. She kept looking at that small white card lying on her nightstand. The letters were simple but powerful. Richard Halden. For most people, it was just a name. For her, it was the man who had first yelled at her, then encouraged her to play and finally apologized. She didn't know what to make of it. Her mother noticed her staring at it. "Are you going to call him?" she asked gently. "I don't know," Emily said honestly. "What if it's nothing? What if I embarrass myself again?" Her mother smiled softly. "The worst thing that can happen is that you don't try. But if you call, something might change." Those words stayed with her all morning. After pacing the apartment for nearly an hour, she finally took a deep breath and picked up her phone. Her hands trembled as she dialed the number. "Good morning," a woman's voice answered. "Halden Enterprises, how may I help you?" Emily's voice wavered slightly. Hello, my name is Emily. Mr. Halden told me to call him. There was a short pause. Then the woman said politely, "Please hold." The seconds felt endless. Then a familiar voice came through. "Emily?" Her heart skipped. "Yes, sir," he sounded calm. "I was hoping you'd call." "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either," she admitted with a small laugh. "You said you had an idea?" "I do," he said. "Can you come to my office today?" "Around 2?" She hesitated. "At your office?" "Yes, don't worry. I just want to talk." After hanging up, Emily stood in silence. She couldn't believe what she'd just agreed to. Her mother looked at her curiously. "Well?" she asked. "He wants to meet," Emily said quietly. Her mother smiled. "Then go, and be yourself." Later that afternoon, Emily took the subway downtown. The city looked different today, brighter somehow. When she reached the tall glass building that bore his company's name, she hesitated at the door. People in suits walked in and out, moving fast and confident. She felt small and out of place, but she straightened her posture and went in. The receptionist greeted her warmly. "You must be Emily. Mr. Halden is expecting you." She was guided into a private elevator. Her reflection stared back at her from the mirrored walls. A simple waitress in a plain blouse, nervous but determined. When the doors opened, she stepped into a bright office with tall windows overlooking the city. It was quiet, calm, and full of light. Richard stood near the window looking out. When he turned around, he smiled. "I'm glad you came." "Thank you for inviting me," she said softly. He gestured to a chair. "Please sit." She sat down, still unsure what this was about. "You said you had an idea," she reminded him. He nodded. "Yes, I've been thinking about what you said and what you played. I've attended hundreds of events, concerts, and performances, but I haven't felt something genuine in years. You reminded me what passion sounds like." Emily looked down, embarrassed. "I just played from my heart." "Exactly," he said. "And that's why I wanted to talk. I support several art programs through my foundation. I'd like to help you get back to music school, properly this time." Her eyes widened. "Music school?" "Yes, tuition, living expenses, instruments, everything. I can cover it. You shouldn't have to choose between survival and your dream." She was speechless. "Sir, that's too much. I can't accept that," he smiled faintly. "You can, and you should. Think of it as an investment, not just in you but in what you'll create." Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them away. "Why are you doing this for me?" He looked thoughtful for a moment. "Because I see something in you that reminds me of someone I lost." Emily didn't ask who he meant, but she could tell it was painful. His eyes softened as he continued. "My wife was a pianist. She passed away years ago. She used to say music is the only language that never lies. When you played, I felt that again. It was like hearing her spirit through your hands." Emily sat quietly, her heart heavy and warm at the same time. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He nodded. "I've spent years building things, companies, buildings, wealth, but I forgot what it felt like to build something beautiful. You reminded me." She took a deep breath. "If I do this, I want to earn it. I don't want charity." He smiled approvingly. "That's exactly why I chose you. So here's the deal. I'll sponsor your education, but you'll perform at a few of my charity events each year. You'll help bring music back to those who've forgotten its value." Emily thought about it, then nodded slowly. "That sounds fair." He stood and offered his hand. "Then we have a deal." She shook it, feeling a strange mix of fear and excitement. For the first time in years, she felt like her life was moving toward something real. Over the next few weeks, everything changed. Richard's assistant helped her apply to a music conservatory. He arranged for her to have a proper piano to practice on, which was delivered to her small apartment. Her mother cried when she saw it. "It's like your dream has come home," she said. Emily spent every spare moment practicing. Her fingers ached, but her heart was light. Sometimes Richard would stop by during her lessons, listening quietly without interrupting. He didn't treat her like an employee or a charity case. He treated her like an artist. One afternoon, after a long practice, she asked him, "Why do you keep helping me?" He smiled. "Because when you help someone else find their light, it helps you see your own." Months passed. Emily enrolled in classes, performed at small events, and gained confidence with each passing day. The first time she stepped onto a real stage again, she thought of her mother sitting in the audience, clapping with tears in her eyes. She also saw Richard watching quietly from the back row, proud but humble. After the concert, he came to congratulate her. "You were wonderful," he said. She laughed softly. "You always say that?" "Because it's always true," he replied. Then he added quietly, "You know, you've changed me too." She looked at him curiously. "How?" "I used to think success was about control, about having power, money, respect. But now I see it's about connection. You reminded me that people, not possessions, make life meaningful." Emily smiled gently. "Maybe music teaches that better than anything else." He nodded. "Maybe it does." One evening after another charity event, Richard introduced her to a group of young musicians. "This is Emily," he told them. "She's living proof that dreams don't die just because life gets hard." They looked at her with admiration and she felt proud, not because of the attention, but because her story had meaning now. She wasn't just the waitress who had dropped a glass. She was someone who had stood up after falling and dared to play again. Later that night, when the crowd was gone, she walked over to the piano alone. The lights were dim and the room was quiet. She sat down, closed her eyes, and began to play softly. Richard listened from the doorway, his hands in his pockets. The melody she played wasn't sad anymore. It was hopeful, full of life. When she finished, she looked up at him. "Thank you," she said simply. He smiled. "No, thank you," she tilted her head. "For what?" "For reminding me that the world still has music left in it." They shared a quiet smile, both understanding something unspoken. Life had brought them together through chance, but it had changed them both in ways neither could have predicted. That night, Emily walked home through the cool city air, her heart light and her future bright. She no longer feared tomorrow. She knew that even when life seemed silent, music would always be there, waiting for her to play again. Weeks turned into months, and months slowly became a year. Life had changed in quiet, beautiful ways for both Emily and Richard. The girl who once worked double shifts at a restaurant was now performing at recitals and small charity events, her name beginning to appear in local newspapers. People started calling her the waitress who silenced the ballroom, but she didn't like that label. She wanted to be remembered for her music, not her past. Still, she never forgot where she came from. Every time she walked into a grand hall or touched the keys of a polished piano, she remembered the clinking of dishes, the tired smiles of her co-workers, and the sound of her mother's voice telling her not to give up. Those memories grounded her, kept her humble, and gave her songs the kind of soul that money could never buy. Richard, on the other hand, found his own life transforming in unexpected ways. The once cold businessman, known for his sharp tongue and distant attitude, had become softer. His assistants noticed how he listened more, how he asked about their families, and how he smiled at the smallest things. For the first time in years, he had something, or someone, that reminded him what kindness looked like. He started spending more time visiting the music programs he sponsored. He didn't just sign checks anymore. He sat in on rehearsals, spoke with students, and told them about a young woman who had taught him that second chances weren't just possible, they were necessary. One afternoon, he invited Emily to meet with him in his office again. When she arrived, he was sitting at his desk surrounded by papers, but his eyes lit up when he saw her. "Come in," he said warmly. "I have something to show you." She smiled, curious. "What is it?" He handed her a thin folder. Inside were blueprints and sketches. "This," he said proudly, "is going to be a music center, a place where anyone, regardless of money or background, can learn, play, and create. It'll have free instruments, classes, and teachers who care, and I want you to be part of it." She looked up, shocked. "Part of it? How?" "I want you to be the director of the youth program," he said. "You'll help guide the students, inspire them, and maybe even find the next hidden talent who just needs a chance, like you once did." Tears filled her eyes before she could even speak. "I don't know what to say," he smiled softly. "Say yes," she nodded slowly. "Then yes." The day the music center opened, it was filled with laughter, song, and people from all walks of life. Children touched instruments for the first time. Teenagers who had once felt lost found a place to belong. Even adults came by to listen, remembering the dreams they had put aside long ago. As the speeches began, Richard stood at the podium. He cleared his throat and looked out at the crowd. "A year ago," he began, "I made a mistake. I judged someone unfairly because I was too blinded by my own pride. But that mistake became the greatest lesson of my life. It reminded me that true worth isn't measured by money or titles, but by heart. The person who taught me that is standing right here beside me, and this center wouldn't exist without her. He gestured toward Emily, who stood shyly to the side. The crowd applauded, and she felt her cheeks grow warm. When it was her turn to speak, she walked up slowly, holding the microphone with both hands. "I don't have fancy words," she said quietly. "I only have gratitude. Life can be unpredictable. Sometimes it pushes you down so hard that you forget who you are. But sometimes if you keep going, life surprises you with kindness from the most unexpected places. This center is proof of that. It's not just a building. It's a promise that no dream should ever die just because someone can't afford it." There was a hush followed by thunderous applause. Cameras flashed, but Emily didn't care about that. What mattered was the feeling in the room: unity, hope, and something deeply human. Later that evening, after the crowd had gone home and the lights had dimmed, Emily sat at the new piano in the center's main hall. The room was quiet, except for the faint hum of the city outside. She began to play, a soft, gentle melody that seemed to capture everything she had been through. Richard stood by the doorway, listening silently. He didn't interrupt. The notes carried memories. The night at the gala, the broken glass, the sound that had once embarrassed her but now defined her life. When she finished, she turned and smiled at him. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked. "All the time," he said. "It started as the worst moment, but it became the best thing that ever happened." She laughed softly. "Funny how life works like that." He nodded. "Yes, it gives you exactly what you need, even when it doesn't look that way." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air was full of quiet understanding. In the weeks that followed, the music center became a symbol of hope in the city. Newspapers wrote about it. Musicians volunteered to teach. Donations poured in, not because of fame, but because people were touched by the story behind it. The Billionaire and the Waitress, two people from different worlds, connected by one simple truth: everyone deserves a chance to be heard. Emily continued to perform, but she also spent hours teaching young students. She loved watching their faces light up when they hit the right note, or finally learned a difficult piece. Every time one of them smiled, she felt the same warmth she had felt the first time she played at the gala, the moment when her fear had turned into courage. Richard would often stop by the center, always quietly. He didn't like to make a show of it. He'd sit in the back listening to the children play, sometimes smiling, sometimes lost in thought. Emily once caught him wiping his eyes during a performance, and she pretended not to notice. One evening, after everyone had left, she found him standing by the piano again. "You know," she said softly, "this place changed everything." He looked at her, his eyes gentle. "You changed everything," she shook her head. "No, we both did. You believed in me when no one else did." He smiled. "You earned it, and you reminded me what it means to believe in something real." The room was quiet for a long moment. Then Emily sat down and began to play again. The same melody she had played that first night when the entire ballroom fell silent. But this time it sounded different, stronger, fuller. It wasn't just a song anymore. It was a story. Theirs. As the last note faded, Richard spoke softly. "That was her song, wasn't it? The one my wife used to play?" Emily nodded. "Yes, I remember you said that." He smiled faintly. "She would have loved this." "I think she'd be proud," Emily said gently. He nodded, his voice quiet. "So am I." Outside, the city lights shimmered like tiny stars. The sound of laughter drifted from the nearby streets. And inside that room, for the first time in years, everything felt right. Time went on and the world moved forward. But the story of that night at the gala never really faded. People still talked about it. How one act of kindness had changed 2 lives and inspired countless others. Emily's music continued to touch hearts everywhere she went. She played in concert halls, small towns, and even hospitals, where her gentle songs comforted patients and families. But no matter how far she went, she always came back to the music center, her true home. And Richard, though older now, always kept a seat reserved in the front row whenever she performed. He never announced who he was or asked for attention. He simply listened, his eyes closed, smiling quietly as the music carried him somewhere peaceful. Years later, when people asked Emily what kept her going, she always said the same thing: A mistake turned into a miracle. I just kept my heart open long enough to hear it. And that was the real story, and not of a billionaire and a waitress, but of two souls who discovered that even in a noisy world, the softest notes can sometimes change everything.